Over the past several years, and more specifically since the attacks on Israel on October 7th, 2023, I've been outspokenly pro-Israel. I've had many pro-Israel analysts and authors on the show, including Rebecca Heinrichs and Zanab Raboa from the Hudson Institute, John Owen from the University of Virginia, and Tanya Lukianova from the Free Press, all of which are wonderful people and people that I've genuinely enjoyed talking to. I've had conversations with a multitude of different people on Israel. I've had conversation with Jared Compton on how the church should view Israel from a theological perspective. And I still think that that's the best theological position on Israel that I've ever heard. And just out of the gate right away, I just want to make sure to be very clear that I am not coming from, and I've never come from, a dispensational theological position. So I've never had the dispensational theological framework. I've always been in the covenantal camp, the covenantal framework, theological position, and I've actually had major problems with dispensational theology as a whole and have voiced those on this podcast. And so to begin, my perspective on Israel was never one of the dispensationalists. Mine was always a covenantal perspective in line with people like Charles Spurgeon and other people within the Reformed theological history. But I was pro-Israel for a very long time, and in some ways I still am, which is why my position on Israel and the war in Gaza has changed, but mostly in relationship to America's involvement in the war. So I want to be clear that Israel has every right to defend themselves, just as any nation does, and I expect that they will defend themselves. Only I hope that their defense comes out of their own budget and at the expense of their own people, not ours, not America, not American soldiers, not American military, not American dollars. So to start, it's important to remember what President Trump campaigned on. That is, no new wars, no new forever wars in the Middle East, and Iran cannot have a bomb. If you followed his campaign at all, you probably heard him say one of those three things. I followed his campaign, and he was constantly saying for the last 10 years from his first campaign in 2016 that Iran cannot have any nuclear weapons. Everybody agreed on that. I totally agreed on that. And then we don't want any more wars in the Middle East with what had happened in Iraq in the Bush administration. Nobody wants that stuff. We all agreed on that. And he promised the American people he was not going to allow them to have a nuclear bomb, and that America wasn't going to get involved in a forever war in the Middle East. This is why we voted for him. If you fast forward to June 22nd, 2025, almost a year ago, when Trump announced that the military had gained credible information that Iran was building a nuclear weapon and that America had successfully bombed Iran's nuclear facilities and had put an end to Iran's nuclear pursuits. This mission was seen as a successful mission in which no Americans died and the attacks from the United States went unnoticed. Trump came out and called this a 12-day war. This happened just about a year ago. I remember it. I remember being up that night, hearing about Operation, not Midnight Fury, Operation Midnight Hammer, and that we had destroyed Iran's nuclear facilities, making it basically impossible for them in the near future to create a nuclear weapon. At this point, I had stopped listening to people like Tucker Carlson, who I'd seen as a fanatic who was continuing to go on and on about how Israel was about to drag the United States into a war with Iran and about how war with Iran would escalate quickly and potentially turn nuclear. I was listening to him religiously for probably 6 to 7 months prior to the 12-day war and had in some ways bought into what he was saying, that if we go to war with Iran, there's going to be a nuclear conflict, there's going to be a nuclear holocaust, things are going to go really poorly, maybe potentially World War III. Bad things were going to happen if we went to war with Iran on behalf of Israel. And then the 12-day war happened, Operation Midnight Hammer happened, and we destroyed their nuclear facilities fairly quickly. And I was like, okay, well, this is great, and we're probably not going to go to war. And all of that fanaticism, all of that crazy speculation that Tucker Carlson was talking about could go out the window. We're obviously not puppets of Israel. We do what we want to do, and that's that. So I stopped listening to Tucker Carlson. And I said, many times on my podcast that Tucker was insane and those who agreed with him were insane and that Tucker simply just hated the Jews. He was an anti-Semite. I don't know if I ever said anti-Semite. Maybe I did, but I definitely said many times that he hated the Jews and that people who agreed with him just simply hated the Jews. Now, my position on all that has changed. and it's changed very recently, like within the last 3 weeks. And I've withheld from actually doing a podcast on this because I wanted to make sure that I was getting the facts straight and that I had some sense of understanding and knowing what I'm talking about before I came and just said a bunch of stuff about Israel and the United States and Iran. And so I said all this stuff. I was in with the narrative that Tucker and all of the people who agreed with Tucker were just anti-Semitic, Jew-hating Nazis, and that the United States was not being controlled by Israel, and that a war with Iran was never going to happen, and blah, 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 blah. You know, all of the talking points. Well, now it's March 23rd, 2026, and it seems that Tucker and all of the Jew haters were actually right. I'm saying that jokingly. I don't think these people actually hate Jews. And I think that if you listen to Tucker Carlson, if you listen to his entire podcast and his full interviews, you get no sense that he is an actual Jew hater. The only reason you would think that he hates Jews and that he's an anti-Semite and that he's a Nazi is if you're listening to mainstream neocon news, Fox News, Mark Levin, Ben Shapiro, and some of the people that I even mentioned at the beginning of my podcast that I've interviewed. If you're listening to these people, you would think that Tucker Carlson just hates the Jews. If you actually listen to Tucker Carlson and what he says, you would realize he doesn't hate the Jews. He just has a problem with the United States doing whatever Israel tells them to do. And I have a problem with that too. And actually, you should have a problem with that. And so it's March 23rd, 2026, as I'm recording this. And it seems that Tucker was correct, that we were dragged into a war with Iran, and it seems unequivocally clear that Israel is the country that did in fact force the United States into this war with Iran. And this is not speculation, okay? So the United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio clearly stated, quote, that if Iran was attacked, and we believe that they would be attacked, they would immediately come after us, and we were not going to sit there and absorb a blow before we responded. Now, in a minute, I'm going to play the full clip of what he said exactly, but if you listen closely to what Marco Rubio is saying, he's saying that if Iran was attacked by Israel, and the United States, believe that Israel was going to attack Iran, then Iran would immediately respond by attacking the United States. So just right out of the gate, I just want to say, ask yourself if that makes sense. Israel attacks Iran. What would Iran do in response to that? Attack the United States. Why? He never says. He doesn't say why Iran wouldn't respond to Israel, but they would respond to the United States, even though the United States had nothing to do with the attack. So there's a broken logic, and I'm going to go through the narratives coming out of the Trump administration and why none of this stuff makes any sense and why my position has changed on all of this. But first, we'll listen to the full clip.
The United States conducted this operation with a very clear goal in mind. I haven't got a chance to see a lot of reporting. I don't understand what the confusion is. Let me explain it to you, and I'll do it once again as clearly as possible. Perhaps you'll report it that way. The United States is conducting an operation to eliminate the threat of Iran's short-range ballistic missiles and the threat posed by their Navy, particularly to naval assets. That is what it is focused on doing right now, and it's doing quite successfully. I'll leave it to the Pentagon and the Department of War to discuss the tactics behind that and the progress that's being made. That is the clear objective of this mission. The second question that's been asked is, why now? Well, there's two reasons why now. The first is it was abundantly clear that if Iran came under attack by anyone, the United States or Israel or anyone, they were going to respond against the United States. The orders had been delegated down to the field commanders. It was automatic, and in fact, it bared to be true because, in fact, within an hour of the initial attack on the leadership compound, the missile forces in the south and in the north, for that matter, had already been activated to launch. In fact, those had already been pre-positioned. The third is the assessment that was made that if we stood and waited for that attack to come first before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
So now you have to ask yourself, who is Marco Rubio talking about when he says the word us? Is he talking about Israel or the United States? He's talking about Israel and the United States. Who is he talking about when he says us? And why is it now that President Trump has shifted and the Trump administration has shifted from Iran cannot have nuclear weapons, which basically everybody agreed with, including myself, to Iran cannot have ballistic missiles, and that it's America's responsibility to disarm them? That's a new talking point. So first it's Iran can't have nuclear weapons. Everybody agrees with that. Now it's Iran can't have ballistic missiles. This is especially weird. When you understand that the ballistic missiles that Iran has, if shot from Iran, cannot even reach the United States. They can barely even reach Europe. So first go back to what Marco Rubio is saying. Marco Rubio is saying that if Iran is attacked by Israel, then Iran is going to respond by attacking the United States. Okay. That doesn't make any sense to begin with, but fine. Let's say that that's true. What are they going to attack the United States with? Well, maybe ballistic missiles. Well, what are they going to do with the ballistic missiles? They're going to shoot them into the United States. No, they're not, because they can't even reach the United States. They can't even reach these. Well, maybe there's sleeper cells all over the country. Maybe there's Iranian immigrants from the Biden administration who are in the country right now who pose a threat to the United States. They're in the United States right now. And we know that if Israel attacks Iran, Iran's going to retaliate against Israel and against the United States by activating these sleeper cells and creating mass chaos and terrorism all across the United States. Okay, maybe that's the case. That actually could happen. Okay, maybe that's the case. That would make sense. The only problem with that is that Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, actually confirmed on X that Iran poses no threat to America. Here's what she said. Sorry. She said, this post and story, and she's responding to an ABC story that was reported by ABC News. This post and story should be immediately retracted by ABC News for providing false information to intentionally alarm the American people. They wrote this based on one email that was sent to local law enforcement in California about a single unverified tip. The email even states the tip was based on unverified intelligence. Yet ABC News left out that critical fact in their story. Why? To be clear, and this is the important part, to be clear, she says, no such threat from Iran to our homeland exists, and it never did. So no threat to Iran or to the homeland, no threat from Iran to our homeland exists, and it never did. That's a weird thing to say if you're about to go to war with Iran. You would think that if there was going to be a war with a country, if you were about to engage in going to war with a country, you would do it on the basis of knowledge, prior knowledge that they did or they were about to pose a threat to your country, that they did right now pose a threat to your country and to your homeland. But Caroline Leavitt says, no, there's no threat. But Marco Rubio says the reason that we had to go to war with them was because there was a threat. So which is it? Those are two high-ranking people in the Trump administration. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. Caroline Leavitt, literally the mouthpiece of Donald Trump, the press secretary. She's saying no threat from Israel. He's saying there is a threat from Israel. Which one is it? Is there a threat or is there not a threat? I think that's what a lot of people want to figure out. Of course, the comments when she posted this were full of questions. People, well, okay, if there's no threat from Iran, why are we at war with them? That's a very good question. I think that's a very valid question, and everybody should be asking themselves that question. But we can't get it. We haven't gotten an answer. And it's also been reported that Vice President J.D. Vance is not in favor of this war, and that at a deeper level within the Trump administration, there is at the very least confusion around why America is at war with Iran. The Spectator has a great article called "There Is No Plan" on their latest magazine. It's also on their website. I'll put the link in the description. I think that's a great title because it seems to me that there is no plan, and that even more, there's a multitude of narratives coming from the same administration. I think that this leads to the obvious position that any sober-minded person would take, and that is, let's just not go to war with Iran. How about we just don't go to war with Iran? How about we just pull out and let Bibi Netanyahu and the Israelis deal with this mess in the Middle East, and let's not deal with this mess in the Middle East. Let's have the United States completely step out of this. I think that that's a rational position. I don't think that it's unnecessarily isolationist. And I think that it's in alignment with logic that would tell you that if there's an administration and there's a multitude of narratives that are conflicting and downright oppositional to one another, coming from the same administration, from the same source, there's probably confusion at the source. There's probably immense confusion if you're allowing for two high-ranking officials in your administration to put two opposing narratives out to the media. Why would you be doing that? Why would anybody allow that to happen? There's only like a couple of options. And the main one is because they don't actually know what the narrative is. They don't actually know what they're doing. They don't actually know why they're in the war. And when you don't know why you're at war, you have a lot of different fake made up reasons for why you're in war. And you start putting those out there and you start kind of shopping them out, seeing what people will take, see what people are interested in. There's no threat to America. Got to keep the people safe because you want people to go crazy. But then you also have to make a justification for why we just went to war. See, there is a threat to America. Well, which one is it? That's just what everybody's trying to figure out. That's what people are wondering. And it's the question that people like Tucker Carlson have been asking. Why are we going to war? It actually was very clear, if you've been following this, that Tucker was one of the only people in the country and in the MAGA movement that was trying to convince Trump to not go to war publicly. For months, he said, do not go to war with Iran. He went to the White House 2 or 3 times, met with Trump personally, and told him to stop. Don't go to war. And the response from everyone in Republican right-wing media has been to slander, to gaslight, to gossip, to say terrible things about Tucker Carlson. He's an anti-Semite. He hates Jews. He hates America. He hates Donald Trump. He's selfish. He's bought out. I said these things because I was reading those sources. Well, come to find out, the truth kind of always prevails, and you always figure out what's been actually happening. It's easier to figure that out when there's a multitude of oppositional narratives, and you can easily go back and say, well, there's a major problem at the core of this, and I don't know what that problem is because I'm not in the rooms with Donald Trump and his people making these decisions and having these discussions, but I can see the fallout of these discussions and decisions, and I can see the fact that there isn't agreement or even concise narrative on the part of the broader Trump administration on what we're actually doing, and if we're going to war for a reason or if we're just going to war because Bibi Netanyahu basically forced our hand, which is what Marco Rubio said. And this does get into a bunch of different questions about geopolitics and Iran and oil and whatever. And there are legitimate conversations there. Trump has obviously said, well, people can suffer for a little while. Your gas prices are going to go up. And they have almost like $4 where I'm from. That's a lot more than what they were prior to the war. And the main question is just, why did we do this? Why did we do this? And if you look at this from a political perspective here in the United States, it makes even less sense because what's coming up this fall, this winter, the midterms, 2026 midterms. And so if the majority of your constituency doesn't want you to go to war with Iran, and 6 months to a year before midterms, you go to war with Iran, ignoring the people who voted for you, what do you think is going to happen during the midterms? You're going to lose. The Republicans are going to lose because people are going to say, I voted for this guy. He told me he was going to have no new wars in the Middle East. And within the first 2 years of his presidency, we got a new war in the Middle East. Why is that happening? And he gave us a multitude of conflicting narratives and basically just told us to shut up and eat the gas prices. Just put it into your budget. Just put it into your budget. Some people can't put it into their budget because it's $4 a gallon, and that's a lot of money. And it was going down and the economy was doing well. And there's a lot to commend Trump for. Obviously, people have gotten more back on their taxes this year than they have in a long time. But it doesn't, none of that negates the fact that we're going to war with Iran and a major Middle Eastern power, which Iran is a major Middle Eastern power because they control a lot of the oil. They control a lot of the world's oil supplies, China, Japan. I mean, this gets into questions of our allies like Japan, who had no idea that we were going to war with Iran and who rely on Iran for a massive portion of their oil. And we're supposed to be allies with them, and we didn't even tell them that we were going to go to war with Iran. And it gets into the questions of what's happening with Donald Trump. Why are we going to war with Iran? Because Benjamin Netanyahu basically told us to. Why does Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, hold the power to tell the United States what to do? It begs other questions as to why, when you ask these questions that I'm asking right now, do you get labeled an anti-Semitic, Jew-hating Nazi? Why is it that they throw ad hominems at you? Why is it that Ben Shapiro loses his shit if you say anything negative about Israel? Why is it that the Free Press does that? Why is it that within a couple of days of the war beginning, the free press is putting out articles why the war in Iran is good for America? Just immediately propagandizing, trying to force the MAGA movement into submission. Hey, this is actually good for you. But wait a second. Logic tells me that this isn't good for us. Prices are going up. And apparently, according to Caroline Leavitt, the literal mouthpiece of Donald Trump, the president of the United States, there are no threats to America from Iran. So I got to pay more for gas. Potentially will cause a massive war in the Middle East. There are legitimate analysts, scholars, geopolitical scholars who are talking about World War III. They're talking about nuclear war. Like, that's not off the table. Trump himself has said nuclear is not off the table. That's not off the table. So how is this good for me? Why is this war good for America? And if it's not good for America, I'm open to that. If they say, well, here's the problem. Caroline Leavitt was wrong. There's a bunch of Iranians in the United States right now. If we didn't go to war with Iran, which doesn't really make any sense, because why is it bad if Israel attacks Iran, but it's not bad if America attacks Iran, whatever. So if we don't go to war with Iran, they will just terrorize and blow everything up and kill everybody in the United States. Okay, well, maybe that would make a little bit more sense. It would still not really make sense at all, but maybe it would make a little bit more sense. We could have a conversation at the very least about how do we get these people out of our country, but there's none of that. There's imminent threat to America. No, there's not imminent threat to America. Well, which one is it? That's the main question. And Trump and the rest of the MAGA people have basically slandered anybody who's disagreed with the official narrative, which is schizophrenic. The official narrative is schizophrenic. So anybody who doesn't subscribe to schizophrenic narratives gets slammed by mainstream MAGA right-wing Republican media. So if you don't have a conflicting narrative in your mind, and if you're not willing to just shut your mouth and do what the neocons tell you to do and think what the neocons tell you to think, you hate Jews. You hate Jews. That's just the reality. You just hate Jews, and nobody can listen to you, and nobody should listen to you. And you don't just hate Jews, you actually support terrorism. You support Iran, you support the death of the United States of America. If you don't subscribe to objectively conflicting narratives coming from the same administration. And you can't ask any questions. And I'm not even saying you can't ask questions. I would love to know the answers to these, but the problem is that the people who have the answers to these questions are the ones perpetrating the confusion. So it's a little bit frustrating as an American citizen who voted for this administration when, one, you get called a racist whatever, which is the same tactic and playbook of the left of the past 15 years. You're called a racist, anti-Semitic, Jew-hating Nazi if you say, hey, why are we going to war for Israel? Why are we doing that? Because it seems very obvious, and it's true that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, who kind of deals with this stuff, that's his job, is telling us that we went to war because Bibi was going to go to war and we just had to do what he was going to do. Why are we going? Why is that? Why can't I ask that? Well, you can't ask that because you're not allowed to ask that because Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin, Ben Shapiro, by the way, who runs Daily Wire, that is a disgusting media organization and has turned its back on what it started as. Actually has turned its back on what it started as a conservative media company, is now basically just a, what do you call it? Great value version of Fox News, a less good version of Fox News. Fox News, thrift store, whatever version. It's not good. So why do we have to listen to what Ben Shapiro says? The same guy who trashed anybody and who didn't get the vaccines, who said, you got to get the vaccines because the experts and the doctors tell us to get the vaccines. Why are we listening to Ben Shapiro, but we're not listening to the guy like, Tucker Carlson, who has connections, grew up in D.C., knows all of the people in D.C., is very close friends with Donald Trump, very, very close friends with J.D. Vance, has connections into the White House, knows these people, and has been around longer than Ben Shapiro and kind of knows his stuff a lot more than Ben Shapiro. Why is it that we should listen to Ben Shapiro and the neocons who have been promoting wars in the Middle East for 30 years and wars on the basis of faulty information? The Iraq war was on the basis of very faulty information that turned to be not true, in which hundreds of thousands of people died, civilians and non-civilians. Americans died. I think 50,000 Americans died in that war on the basis of faulty, actually just objectively wrong information that Iraq had a nuclear weapon or something like that. And it was wrong. And we sent a bunch of guys to war and they died and civilians died. And it was a disaster and it's caused a civil war that's still going on in Iraq to this day. Why should we listen to those people? You can't ask that question as a Republican because the Republicans for a very long time have been the party of never-ending wars because somebody's getting rich off of the never-ending wars. And you have to ask yourself, who's getting rich off of the never-ending wars? I don't have the answer to all of that, but someone or a group of people or many people are getting rich off of these wars. That was what Eisenhower warned us about a long time ago. And this was a guy who was in the military and who was the president of the United States. He warned us that the military industrial complex will grow to be so large and so big that people will just try to go to war for the sake of the financial gain that they'll receive out of going to war. He said that. And we all know that he said that. It's one of the most famous quotes in American history. And we know this. But my position on Israel has changed. It's not that I don't think that Israel has any significance theologically. I still do. I think Tucker's theology is wrong on Israel. I don't believe in replacement theology. I don't think that the church is the new Israel. And I did a great podcast with Jared Compton from Bethlehem Seminary on that topic. And he studied that extensively from the theological standpoint. I think that the ethnicity of the Jews is still significant. And you should go back and listen to that and think through it and read Romans 9 through 11, because that's where the crux of the argument comes from. That said, Jared and myself, when we did that podcast years ago, both were very clear that this does not mean that you just do whatever Israel does and you praise what they do. The fact is that Paul says that there are enemies and our friends, that there are enemies in the gospel. We don't agree with them. They worship a false conception of the one true God. They are not Christians. They are going to hell. They are blinded. And so the Jews cannot be trusted in the same way a non-Christian cannot be trusted. On the contrary, the Jewish people, on the basis of their ethnicity, and Paul, the Apostle Paul, makes his argument on the basis of his own Jewish ethnicity, are the chosen people of God. They are the chosen people of God. And that the promises made to the Jewish people, the ethnic Jewish people in the Old Testament, will be fulfilled. And they are being fulfilled. And they weren't simply fulfilled only in Christ, but they'll be fulfilled in the end in a redemption of the Jewish ethnic people. It's a very complicated argument, and it took 2.5 hours to go through. It's not dispensational because the dispensationalists have way too many false presuppositions and there's way too many heretical positions within their theology. But it's a good position. It's the best position that I've ever heard. It doesn't completely dismiss the Jewish ethnicity, and you really can't. When you read through Romans 9 through 11, Paul makes his entire argument on the basis of his own Jewish ethnicity. But put that all aside from a political, geopolitical perspective, that doesn't mean that you and I, as Christians, need to unequivocally, no matter what, support everything that Israel does. We can't, because if you get blinded by a false theology, which is happening in the United States, then you'll do very stupid things. You'll follow people who have rejected Christ. The Jews have rejected Christ. So is everybody else. So are the Gentiles. The Jews killed Christ. That's true. So have the Gentiles. Pontius Pilate's the first postmodernist. What is truth? He could have made the decision to put an end to it right there, but he didn't. And so from a theological perspective, that's what this podcast has been about from the beginning, is looking at the world through a theological lens and saying, okay, what does the Bible say? And then how do we make sense of the world through that lens? Because that's how Christians should think, contrary to popular evangelical belief that tries to create a dichotomy between religion and all other aspects of life. The Bible says that it governs all of life. Christianity and the gospel governs all of life, including politics and geopolitics. And that means that we have to think. That means that our life is a little bit difficult because we have to think and use our brains. And that said, I've been doing that, thinking and using my brain. I've been looking into, the war and reading up and continuing on the theological pursuit of a proper understanding of Israel's role within the modern church. And I've come to these conclusions, and I think it's pretty obvious just from a standpoint of the United States and the president of the United States and the military of the United States' sole job is to defend and protect the United States. Our job is not to defend the rest of the world. It's not to defend Israel. It's not to defend anyone else. It's to defend the United States of America and our citizens. We have allies and we make agreements and we fulfill those to the best of our ability. But our job is not to defend Israel. Our job is not to defeat Israel's enemies. Our job is to defend America and to defeat America's enemies on the basis of what the American people have decided, because the United States is a unique government in which the American people are the ones who choose the people who govern us, and the people who govern us have to govern in accordance with the people whom elected them. That's what America is. And so if the majority of Republicans and the majority of people on the conservative side, and this is true, don't want a war with Iran, and Trump decides we're going to war with Iran because Bibi Netanyahu said so and because Israel said so, then the question needs to be asked, why are we allowing for somebody like him to be in power? Why are we allowing for these types of Republicans to continue to hold power in our White House and in Congress? Why is that happening? Why are we letting these people do this? Continuing to get burnt. And I understand Trump has a very complicated past. The last 10 years have been very, very interesting, to say the least. But if the goal of our government is to protect our people and to work on behalf of the American people, and the American people are telling it very clearly, we don't want you to go to war with Iran, why are we going to war with Iran? I think that that's a really good question. And I think that a lot of people just want to know the answer to that question. Why are we doing this? Just give me a reason and make it so that whatever answer you give me to that question isn't conflicting with other answers that other people within your own administration are giving. Just try to do that. For the love of God, try to. And then maybe we could find some common ground or something like that, or just the conversation could open up and we could either learn more information that we don't know as American citizens, or the government could say, yeah, Trump could say, and the administration could say, we screwed this whole thing up. We're going to pull out, and we're not going to let Israel let us know or tell us what to do. I mean, there's many more questions. There's many more data points and things that need to be discussed. I think it's clear that this came at a very interesting time, and a very poignant time for Trump, in which there were questions surrounding his past with Epstein and the Epstein files, a huge portion of them being released, and many people on the Republican and Democrat side being mentioned and talked about in the Epstein files and emails, and very sick and disturbing stuff, pictures and emails sent back and forth between major world leaders, major organization leaders, CEOs, presidents, whatnot. Many people were talking with Epstein in huge positions of power and authority. And so the theory was, even before we went to war with Iran, that, hey, I think Trump's going to go to war with Iran so that he gets everybody to stop talking about Epstein. And guess what? That's exactly what he did. And guess what? It worked. Everybody's talking about Iran. No one's talking about Epstein. And so you have to ask yourself these questions. Why are these things happening? Is there a deeper reason other than what the paid neocon bimbos are telling you on Fox News? Is there any other reason? Could there possibly be another reason? Is it because the president of the United States was involved in a massive sex trafficking scandal that goes decades back with the most powerful people in the world? Potentially could be. I don't know. Is it because of some other conspiracy, some other cover up? So I don't even know. I don't know. Then you have to ask yourself, why is it that the people who are genuinely trying to figure out what's true, Brett Weinstein's the most recent one, you have Tucker Carlson, you have those sorts of people who are just trying to figure out what the hell is going on because you're hearing conflicting narratives, and anybody with ears who's willing to think puts the pieces together and says, these don't actually fit together. What do we do about this? Why are those people being demonized in the same exact way, with the same exact tactics and the same exact methods that the left used against anyone who went against the BLM stuff, the transgender stuff, whatever their agenda was at the time in the last 10 years? They used the same rhetorical tactics as those people. Why are they doing that to people on their own side who don't agree with going to war with people who apparently do and don't pose an imminent threat to the United States of America at the same time? Why is that? I think those are legitimate questions. I think those are good questions. And I think that that's something for Americans and just Christians to think through, including myself. I'm not saying that I've come to any sort of total position on this end position because everything is shifting and changing so quickly. And if you're keeping up with this, which you should be keeping up with it, you would know that there's so many different narratives, so many different things coming out. But if you're looking to the White House, if you're looking to the Trump administration and you're asking, what are they saying? They're the closest to the situation. Maybe they have the best insight. What are they saying? And you're coming back with narratives that objectively are conflicting with one another. That means that you're not in a good place. That means that the country is not in a good place and it's not being led by competent people. That is what it means objectively. And there's no argument against it, which is why people in the neocon sphere won't have a conversation, won't debate, and won't talk with anybody outside of their own echo chamber, because they know deep down, just like the left knows deep down, that their ideologies are incoherent, illogical, and unreasonable. They don't make any sense. They know that. They know it. They've maybe lied to themselves for long enough to sear their ability to actually know it, but they knew it at one point. They know that what they're saying doesn't make any sense, and they don't care because they know that the military-industrial complex will make money, and they know that the media makes a hell of a lot more money when there's a war than when there's not a war. Peace is not profitable for these people, and you have to keep that in mind. That is the case for media. That's why you have to be skeptical of the media all the time. They're always trying to conjure up some sort of hysteria because they know that that's where the money is. You get people hysterical, you get people nervous, you get people scared. Well, then they're going to keep coming back. They're going to keep coming back for more because they want to know what's going to happen. Because it's a habit of our nature, of our sin nature, to be obsessed with being worried, with being scared about what's going to come next. And they prey off of that. And so if you find yourself continuing to go back to the neocons and getting the same narrative, the same rhetoric that that we need to go to war, we need to bomb these people, we need to kill all these people, it doesn't matter who they are, civilians or not, we just need to kill all of them because they're all evil and who cares and they're irredeemable and blah, 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 blah. If you find yourself going back to that, maybe there's a problem with you. Maybe that might be the real problem is you. And the media is going to do what the media is going to do, but as Christians, we have to look at the media and we have to analyze them through a biblical perspective and ask ourselves, why am I watching this? Is this true? Do these narratives make any sense? Is this logical? Is this reasonable? And if all of the people who are asking the good questions and trying to figure this out and coming up with decent answers and hypotheses, if all of those peoples are being maligned and belittled and slandered by the same group of people, by all of the major institutions, the major Trump and Republican MAGA institutions, you have to ask yourself the questions. You have to ask yourself, why are you listening to them? Because I said it before the election, and I'll continue to say it. There is no philosophical difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. It's a matter of degree. They're both liberals. One of them was more liberal than the other one. I said that. I've been saying that for years. They're both liberals. And the rhetorical tactics of liberalism are rooted in Marxism. And Marxism basically just says everything is about power. Nietzsche as well. Everything is about power. And so let's just beat each other down, and whoever has the power controls the narrative, and whoever tries to dissent against the narrative gets beat down because they don't have the power. And of course, Christianity itself defies that entire understanding of reality. Christianity says power, one, isn't what you think it is. Actually, power is found in the lowliest of places. Power is found in a manger. Power is found in the death of Christ on the cross. It's not the same thing that you think it is. It's not found in nuclear weapons and in the White House and in kings and in military power. No, it's not found in any of that. It's found in the lowliest of places among the people that nobody cares about and in places that nobody would ever think of. That's where power comes from. And so Christ and Christianity have flipped everything on its head. This was the great paradox of Christianity in the early centuries. The more you killed, the faster it grows. The more Christians killed, the faster the religion grew. How is that possible? How is that possible? Because there's power in a true narrative. There's power in a true message. That it can last 2,000 years through massive persecution and through the so-called death of God in the late 1800s from Nietzsche, that it can outlast all of that. And as the world gets more and more rooted in this Marxist Nietzschean power struggle for dominance and control over the narrative, there still is a small voice. There always is a small voice in which the one true narrative, the one truth of all, the way, the truth, the life, maintains its validity because it is fundamentally true. It's not just partially true. It is fundamentally true. And so as Christians, our job is to look at the world and to look at the different narratives from the two different Marxist parties that are in power right now in our country and sift through it and figure out what's exactly true. Is it good that the Democrats want to murder babies? No, that's not good. We know that. So we just throw that out. We just that party that's gone, that's dead to us. We don't really care. Their ideologies are so demented, so evil, so sick, and so grotesque that we're just going to throw that away. If their ideology is war doesn't matter, do whatever you want, kill as many people as possible, we have to ask ourselves the same question. Is that a good thing? Is that good from a biblical perspective? Should we want war? No, war is a result of sin. Is war sometimes necessary? Absolutely, 100%. Is it necessary if there's a threat posed against your country, against your nation? Does a government have a responsibility to protect its own people? 100%. But how can we know if it has that responsibility if they're telling us that there is no threat to America? And then the next day that there is, and the next day that there isn't. How can we know as American citizens who run our government, or so we think? How can we actually know that? We can't. It's epistemological. It is a deeply rooted question. And for Christians, the job is not to just blindly subscribe to whatever strong, powerful, or empathetic, which is a fake term, by the way. It's a completely fake term, but whatever empathetic and nice and caring and loving voice with the same inflection, blah, blah. We subscribe to all of that and just do whatever they tell you. That's not our job. Our job is to read the Bible, to understand theology, to be rigorous in our study, to know what is going on around us, and to make the best objective analysis of the world on the basis of a Christian worldview. And you would think that Christians would be the best at that because we actually possess and maintain within us the truth that upholds all other truth. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. That is within us, and we have that as Christians. And so blindly adhering to political parties and ideologies on the basis of what random people say that you've never met is probably not the best way to live your life. Actually, it isn't the best way to live your life. One of the other reasons my position on Israel has changed is because of the people who support it. The people that I've mentioned who I've even had on this podcast, not all of them, but some of them, are dead set, and they were dead set since Trump won in 2024, that America was saved and that America was back. And where America is back, we're a good country, we're moral now, we got our guy back, and he's the best. And I never said that one time. I never said that leading up to the election. I never said that after the election. I don't think that Trump's a Christian. He's a liberal. He's a less liberal than the other liberals, so I liked him better. He was a lesser of two evils in the second election, not in the first one. In the first one, he opposed abortion full on. Now that's not really important to him anymore. But I've been saying that for years, that Trump is not. He's not a Christian. He's not conservative. He's a libertarian. Probably more liberal. But the people who are supporting the war in Israel, and this is a massive portion of right-wing conservative media, people in the Daily Wire, people that I personally like, that I personally know, people at Hudson Institute, people at Manhattan Institute, people at the Free Press, people, all of it. And I'm not saying the Free Press is a conservative MAGA or whatever, but people within this constituency of media companies that is in support of the war. You have to ask yourself, what a worldview are they operating out of? Are they operating out of a Christian worldview? Are they operating out of Christian presuppositions? The answer is no. And the reason that I can know that is because the second Trump got in, they got their guy in, they got Trump in, they got their strong man in. They just started going nuts about it. They started bragging about it. They started, we got our guy. This is great. America's the greatest country in the history of the world. We're the best. And I do think we are the greatest country in the history of the world up until a certain point, up until we started mass infanticide. That's probably when I would draw the line. Like, yeah, I don't think we're the best country in the history of the world anymore, but for 150 years, man, it's almost 200 years. It's a wonderful country. Did amazing. The greatest things that have ever happened in the history of the world. many of those things happen in this country. And I love the United States for that. And I celebrate America and I'm patriotic. But America is no longer the best country in the world. I don't know who is, but it's not the United States. The country has killed more babies than basically any country in the history of the world. China kills babies crazy, but the United States in the West, the beacon, the city on a hill, the beacon. No, we're not that. We're not that at all. And if the people you're listening to are cramming that literal garbage lies down your throat, and I don't even know if that's the right terminology. My wife will say that's not even the right terminology, down your throat. That sounds bad, but you know what I'm saying. They're pumping that into your brain night after night. America's the best country in the world. You just defend America. I'm not doing that. America's murdered babies for 60 years. Potentially hundreds of millions of babies for over 60 years, including the pill, including IVF. We murder babies. We murder more babies than anybody else. We basically invented the modern baby murdering machine. And you're gonna sit there as a Republican. We got our guy. We got Trump in. Therefore, we're the best country in the world. We're not the best country in the world until we stop murdering babies. In fact, historically, we are objectively on the downfall. We are on the civilizational collapse portion of our history. We are on we murder too many babies and society is going to fall apart. We are on the death rate is higher than the birth rate part of American history. We are not on a good path. We are not on a good path objectively on the basis of every statistic you could possibly imagine, other than wealth and money, which you could even make an argument that we don't have as much wealth and money as we think that we have because it's based off of nothing, because we don't have a gold standard. So you could make that argument as well. But I'm just saying, on moral standards, we aren't the best country in the history of the world. We are actually one of the worst on the basis of how many innocent babies have been slaughtered in this country. And so people who get angry at you and say, well, you shouldn't disparage the United States of America. It's like, as a Christian, my job is to literally say the truth, no matter what, and say, hey, this country that I live in is murdering babies. Should I turn a blind eye to that and just pretend like it's not happening? Should I turn a blind eye to the fact that the church in this country has done nothing about that? Nothing on a broad scale. Nothing. That actually most churches won't even call it a sin. They won't even mention it. Most churches won't even talk about it. They just won't even mention it. I just shouldn't talk about that, though. You shouldn't talk about that. You're not allowed to talk about that. America's the best. We're great because of George Washington and John Adams, who would have hated what the United States is today. They would have hated it. And they would have done a lot worse to the people in power than what anybody has even thought of in the modern age. They would have been a lot worse to them. They would have said worse things. They would have done worse things to them because they actually had conviction and they had an understanding of what happens under tyrannical, authoritarian dictatorships like the United States. And that's a fact. It is. When you're murdering babies and you're going to war on behalf of a foreign nation and ignoring your own people, you're not a democracy anymore. That's actually a fact. You're not a democracy. When a political party, the Democrats, can steal elections, when you can just lie your way out of things, when you can use lawfare, when you can get people like Nixon to just resign on the basis of what? Nothing. On the basis of what the media says, you're not a democracy. This isn't a beacon of democracy. It's something way worse. It's something way worse. And when you get into the studies of what the CIA has done, which you should, because the CIA is a real entity in the United States that you pay for, and it's non-elected bureaucratic people involved who do some of the most vile and horrific things that you could possibly imagine, like really demonic, and I'm not saying that lightly or loosely, demonic and satanic things. And you've got neocons telling you, no, we're the best Christian country. No, we're not, actually. We're just not. Objectively, on the basis of what? The Bible. What the Bible says is good and bad. America does way more of the bad stuff than the good stuff. It's not even a close competition. It's just a fact. And so that's why my position has changed on all of this. Because once you get out of the ridiculously life-sucking, blood-sucking, ideology-sucking ideology, ideology-sucking ideology. That's wonderful. That's great. That's great. I love that. Ideology-sucking ideology. Once you get out of the neocon ideology, the neocon worldview, the neocon vortex, in which all war is good, America can do whatever it wants, we police the world, everybody must listen to us, and then we obey Israel when they tell us to go to war, even though we're supposed to be the best people in the world and we're supposed to be the ones in control of everything, and give you false narratives and contradicting narratives and throw different ideas out back and forth and try to see what people like most so that they can play optics and make Trump look good. Yeah, that's not good. When Trump's spiritual advisor is Paula White, that's not good. And I've never defended this stuff. Paula White is a heretic. She's going to hell. Everybody knows that. Anybody who has read their Bible for 30 seconds knows that Paula White is a daughter of hell. Anybody. The heretical Jewish Pharisees would have been like, what in the world is Paula White? What is that? They would have been like, why do you have this lady advises the Trump on spiritual matters? They would have been baffled because she's insane, because she's actually insane. And so that's the spiritual advisor to the president. And Christians across the country want to make the argument that Donald Trump is like this godly American moral president. He's just not. He's just not. Objectively not. And I will argue with anyone on this, no matter who it is, but I can't get people to come on this podcast to have a conversation about what's going on in Israel. I cannot do it. People I've had on before, and I've reached out to many different people and said, hey, do you want to come on again? But nope, they won't do it. People have come on multiple times to talk about things. They will not talk about this. If you disagree with Israel, they won't even talk to you. They won't talk to you anymore. They have nothing to do with you. It's the same tactics of the liberal regime of the last 10 years. The Democrat, liberal, postmodernist machine. It's just postmodern rhetoric and evasive tactics. Slanderous, belittling. It's all of that. They just do that publicly. Then you say, hey, let's have a conversation about this. I'm not saying they're doing this to me, but other people have tried this. Let's have a conversation. No, we can't have a conversation. Not going to happen. We're bigger than that. We're bigger than that. We're not going to have a conversation because you're a racist, anti-Semitic, Nazi bigot. That's why. Yeah, but what about like what Marco Rubio and Caroline? No. You're racist. You hate Jews. You want all the Jews dead. I don't want all the Jews dead. I love the Jews. I have a theological position that holds to the fact that eschatologically, the Jews have a significant role and that God will win them back through the Gentiles. What Paul says in Romans 9-11. I believe that. And I believe that the Israelis are the Jewish people, the ethnic Jewish people are God's chosen people still. I don't believe in replacement theology. I don't think that there's a good argument for that in the Bible. That said, I don't need to blindly adhere to everything that Israel does. That doesn't make any sense. And so I'm not going to do that.